The headlights cut through the darkness like twin knives, illuminating nothing but empty asphalt stretching endlessly ahead. Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white against the black leather. Mile marker 247 flashed past his window. Still 3 hours to Denver, still 3 hours of this godforsaken stretch of highway that seemed to exist in a void between worlds. The radio had died 20 miles back, leaving him alone with the hypnotic hum of tires on pavement and the occasional groan of his cargo trailer. He hauled electronics mostly, nothing exciting, but it paid the bills and kept him moving. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, the darkness seemed hungry. A pair of red taillights materialized ahead, growing larger as Jake's rig closed the distance. Another truck, probably another driver fighting the same battle against exhaustion and isolation. As he drew closer, Jake could make out the silhouette. A massive 18-wheeler with a peculiar, boxy trailer that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The truck was moving slowly, maybe 50 miles per hour in a 75 zone. Jake flicked his high beams twice, the universal signal for move over, but the vehicle ahead didn't respond. He tried the radio, scanning through CB channels. Breaker 19, this is Midnight Express. Got a copy on that black Kenworth up ahead? Static answered him. Nothing but the white noise of empty frequencies. Jake checked his mirrors and pulled into the passing lane. As his cab drew level with the other truck, he glanced over, expecting to see a fellow driver maybe nodding in acknowledgement or raising a hand in the trucker's wave. Instead, the cab was dark. Completely dark. No dome light, no dashboard glow, no silhouette of a driver. The steering wheel was turning by itself. Jake's foot found the accelerator instinctively, and his truck surged forward. He needed to get past this thing, needed to put distance between himself and whatever impossibility he'd just witnessed. But as he pulled ahead, something made him check his mirrors again. The black truck was following. Not just following, it was gaining, despite Jake's speedometer now reading 85. The CB crackled to life. Where you running to, Midnight Express? The voice was wrong. It sounded like gravel being poured through a broken speaker, like words formed by something that had never had vocal cords. Jake grabbed the microphone with a shaking hand. Who is this? Identify yourself. Laughter filled the cab, a sound like grinding metal. I've been driving these roads longer than you've been breathing, boy. Longer than this highway's been here. Longer than this state's been settled. Jake's eyes found the mirrors again. The black truck was directly behind him now, so close he could see into the empty cab. The steering wheel continued its autonomous dance, turning left and right in perfect sync with the road's curves. What do you want? Jake whispered into the microphone. Same thing I've always wanted. Same thing I've taken from 47 others on this stretch of road. Company. The temperature in Jake's cab began to drop. His breath misted in front of him as frost started forming on the inside of his windshield. The heater was running full blast, but the cold seemed to seep through the metal itself. Pull over, Midnight Express. Pull over and we can talk proper like. Driver to driver. Go to hell, Jake snarled, pushing his rig harder. The engine roared, but the speedometer needle wouldn't climb past 90. Been there already, the voice replied. Wasn't much to my liking. Something slammed into Jake's trailer from behind. The impact sent his truck lurching forward, the cab swaying violently. He fought to maintain control as his cargo shifted, creating a thunderous crash from the back. Another impact, harder this time. Jake could see the black truck in his mirrors, its massive front bumper somehow stretching and extending like liquid metal to strike his trailer. The thing wasn't bound by physics, wasn't limited by the laws that governed normal trucks. 47 drivers, the voice continued conversationally, as if they weren't engaged in a deadly chase at 90 miles per hour. All alone on night runs like yourself. All thinking they were tough enough to handle whatever the road threw at them. Jake spotted an exit ahead, a single off-ramp leading to what his GPS showed as absolutely nothing. No town, no services, just a county road that disappeared into farmland. But it was a chance. He waited until the last possible second, then yanked the wheel hard right. His trailer swung wide, tires screaming in protest as he took the exit at dangerous speed. The black truck shot past on the highway, its momentum carrying it beyond the off-ramp. Jake allowed himself a moment of relief as he slowed on the winding county road. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the wheel. He reached for his phone to call 911, to report, what exactly? A ghost truck? A haunted 18-wheeler? The screen showed no signal. Behind him, headlights appeared. Thought you were clever, didn't you, Midnight Express? The CB crackled with that grinding voice. This is my road. All roads are my roads when the sun goes down. Jake pressed harder on the accelerator, but the narrow county road wasn't built for high-speed truck traffic. His trailer swayed dangerously on the curves, threatening to jackknife with every turn. The black truck was gaining again, its impossible speed unhindered by the road's limitations. In his mirrors, Jake could see the thing more clearly now. The trailer wasn't carrying cargo. It was hollow, empty except for what looked like driver's seats arranged in rows like pews in a church. 47 seats. All occupied. The figures sitting in those seats were transparent, their faces turned toward Jake's truck with expressions of infinite sadness. Drivers from different eras, he could see the clothing styles changing from seat to seat. Flannel shirts and trucker caps from recent decades, but also older styles. Suspenders and work shirts that looked like they belonged in the 50s. Even further back, clothing that predated the interstate highway system entirely. They're waiting for you, the voice said. Been saving you a seat right up front. Something was wrong with the road ahead. It was shifting, changing, becoming something that had never been paved. The asphalt was fading into dirt, then into something that might have been an old wagon trail. Jake's headlights illuminated wooden fence posts that flickered in and out of existence, telegraph poles that appeared and disappeared like mirages. This road's older than you know, the grinding voice explained. Older than cars, older than trucks. Always been here in one form or another. And I've been driving it in one form or another since the first wheels turned. Jake's truck hit a pothole that shouldn't have existed, bouncing violently. The GPS screen was showing impossible things now, roads that led nowhere, cities that had never been built, mountain ranges in the middle of Kansas plains. Time works different out here, the voice continued. Past and present, they're just suggestions. I've collected drivers from decades that ain't even happened yet. The black truck pulled alongside Jake's cab. Through the empty driver's window, Jake could see the interior more clearly. The seats weren't just occupied by translucent figures, they were part of them. The drivers had become integrated with the vehicle itself, their consciousness merged with something larger and hungrier. Jake made his choice. He yanked the wheel hard left, sending his truck off the impossible road and into what looked like an empty field. The cab tilted as it left the pavement, then tilted further as it began to roll. Jake felt the world spinning around him, metal screaming, glass shattering. When the truck finally came to rest on its side, Jake was hanging from his seatbelt, blood running down his face from a dozen cuts. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he could see the black truck sitting motionless on the road, waiting. The CB crackled one last time. 48, the voice said with satisfaction. Jake tried to move, tried to free himself from the wreckage, but his legs wouldn't respond. He could smell diesel fuel leaking, could see sparks from damaged electrical systems. In the distance, the black truck's trailer door was swinging open, revealing row upon row of empty seats. All except one. The figure climbing out of the truck wore a flannel shirt and a baseball cap with a company logo Jake recognized, his own. The translucent form looked exactly like Jake, but with eyes that held the weariness of eternal driving. Don't fight it, his own voice said from outside the wreckage. It's not so bad once you accept it. The road never ends, but at least you're never alone. Jake closed his eyes as flames began to lick at the spilled fuel. When he opened them again, he was sitting in the passenger seat of the black truck, looking back at his own burning wreckage through windows that showed him everything and nothing. The truck was already moving, searching for its next passenger on the endless night roads that existed between the world of the living and somewhere else entirely. In the CB radio, a new voice crackled to life, young, confident, unaware. Breaker 19, this is Denver Dan. Anyone out there got their ears on? Jake reached for the microphone with hands that were no longer quite solid, no longer quite real. Behind him, 47 other drivers turned their translucent faces toward the sound with expressions of hungry anticipation. The black truck rolled on through the darkness, its impossible engine humming a song older than highways, older than the very concept of roads. And somewhere ahead, Denver Dan's headlights cut through the night, illuminating nothing but empty asphalt stretching endlessly ahead. Mile marker 247 flashed past his window, and the hunt began again. Chat controls Sonnet 4. Sarah had been driving trucks for 15 years, but she'd never seen anything like the cargo manifest lying on her passenger seat. The pickup location was listed as Warehouse 7, Industrial District, a place that didn't exist according to her GPS. The delivery address was even stranger, Final Destination, Route Undetermined. The payload was described simply as specimens, handle with extreme care. The money was too good to refuse. $20,000 for one night's work, cash on delivery. No questions asked. Sarah had debts to pay, and her regular freight runs weren't covering the mounting bills from her mother's medical treatments. She'd found Warehouse 7 eventually, tucked away behind a maze of abandoned factories in the industrial sector outside Bakersfield. The building looked like it hadn't been used in decades, rusted metal siding, broken windows, weeds growing through cracks in the loading dock. But the lights were on inside, casting an eerie green glow through the grimy windows. The loading crew worked in complete silence. 3 men in hazmat suits rolled out a dozen metal containers, each one roughly the size of a coffin, sealed with multiple locks and warning labels in languages Sarah didn't recognize. The containers were cold to the touch and vibrated slightly, as if something inside was trying to get out. "What's in these things?" Sarah had asked the foreman, a thin man whose face was hidden behind a reflective visor. "Best you don't know," he'd replied in a voice that sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. "Just drive straight through the night. No stops. No delays. And whatever you do, don't open the trailer." Now, 3 hours into the drive, Sarah was beginning to regret taking the job. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, empty except for the occasional roadkill scattered across the asphalt. Her CB radio picked up nothing but static, and her cell phone had lost signal 50 miles back. The containers in her trailer had grown louder. What started as subtle vibrations had become distinct thumping sounds, like heartbeats amplified through metal. Sometimes she could swear she heard voices, not human voices, but something else. Something that might have been human once. At mile marker 187, her headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. Sarah slammed on the brakes, her 18-wheeler skidding to a stop just feet from what appeared to be a woman in a tattered white dress. The figure didn't move, didn't react to the massive truck bearing down on her. Sarah climbed down from the cab, leaving the engine running. "Hey! Are you okay? You can't stand in the middle of the highway." The woman turned slowly. Her face was pale as moonlight, her eyes completely black. When she opened her mouth to speak, Sarah could see that her tongue had been cut out. "They're awake." The woman managed to whisper, the words formed by lips alone. Before Sarah could respond, the woman dissolved like mist, leaving nothing but the smell of formaldehyde and decay. Sarah scrambled back into her cab, heart pounding. In her mirrors, she could see more figures emerging from the darkness on both sides of the road. Dozens of them, all wearing the same tattered clothing, all with the same mutilated mouths and hollow eyes. The engine roared as she accelerated, leaving the ghostly crowd behind. But the thumping from her trailer had intensified, and now she could hear scratching sounds, like claws against metal. Her CB radio crackled to life. "Midnight Hauler, this is highway control. You need to pull over immediately." Sarah grabbed the microphone. "This is Midnight Hauler. Who is this? I didn't know there was any highway control on this route. Ma'am, you're carrying hazardous materials that have been reported stolen. Federal agents are en route to your location. Pull over now for your own safety." "Stolen? Nobody told me anything about stolen." Sarah's words were cut off by a sound that made her blood freeze. One of the containers in her trailer had just burst open. The truck began to shake violently. Through her mirrors, Sarah could see something large moving around in the trailer, its shadow visible through the gaps in the rear doors. Whatever was in those containers, at least one of them was free. The CB crackled again, but this time the voice was different, deeper, inhuman. "Driver, let us out, we've been sleeping so long." Sarah pushed the accelerator to the floor. The speedometer climbed past 80, past 90, but the shaking grew worse. She could hear more containers bursting open, could hear things moving around in the cargo area that sounded too big to fit in those coffin-sized boxes. A gas station appeared ahead, its fluorescent lights flickering erratically. Sarah pulled in without slowing much, her trailer swinging wide as she fought to control the massive rig. She needed to see what was happening back there, needed to understand what she was carrying. The station was deserted except for an elderly attendant who watched her through the bulletproof glass with eyes that seemed far too knowing. Sarah grabbed a flashlight from her cab and walked toward the rear of her trailer, her hands shaking as she reached for the door handles. The locks had been destroyed from the inside. Long gouges in the metal doors suggested claws or talons of incredible size. Sarah pulled one door open and shined her light inside. The trailer was empty. No containers, no cargo, nothing but scratch marks on the walls and floor. But that was impossible, she could still hear movement, could still feel the truck swaying under the weight of something massive. "They're not in there anymore," the gas station attendant said from behind her. Sarah spun around. The old man had left his booth and was standing just a few feet away, his uniform stained with something dark. "They're underneath," he continued, pointing at the ground beneath the trailer. "That's where they like to hide when they're hunting." Sarah looked down and saw eyes staring back at her from the shadows beneath the truck. Dozens of eyes, reflecting her flashlight beam like stars in an oil-black sky. She ran. Not toward her cab, but toward the road, hoping to flag down another vehicle, hoping to find help. Behind her, she could hear the truck groaning as something incredibly heavy moved beneath it. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, and Sarah waved frantically as they approached. The vehicle slowed, another 18-wheeler, its driver rolling down his window as it pulled alongside her. "Need help, miss?" The driver was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a concerned expression. "There's something wrong with my cargo," Sarah gasped. "I need to call the police, need to." The man's expression changed. His kind eyes became cold, calculating. "Sarah Mitchell, age 34, driving license number RT 447-892-15. You picked up the cargo at Warehouse 7 at 11:47 p.m. Sarah backed away from the truck. "How do you know that? Who are you?" "We're the people those specimens escaped from," he replied. "And you're going to help us get them back." More trucks were arriving now, surrounding the gas station. Sarah counted at least a dozen vehicles, all identical, all with drivers who stared at her with the same cold expression. The fluorescent lights above began to strobe faster, casting everything in a nightmarish dance of light and shadow. Something roared from beneath Sarah's trailer, a sound like nothing she'd ever heard, like the death cry of some prehistoric beast. The other drivers didn't seem surprised or concerned. They were waiting. The specimens are from a research facility that officially doesn't exist, the first driver explained. They're the result of experiments that were supposed to create the perfect soldiers. Instead, they created something else. Something that should never have been allowed to wake up. Sarah could see shapes moving in the darkness beyond the gas station lights. Large shapes, hunched and wrong, circling the area like wolves around a campfire. The roaring grew louder, more frequent, and was joined by other sounds, clicking, chittering, something that might have been laughter. They feed on fear, another driver said, stepping down from his cab. And right now, you're terrified. You're like a beacon to them. What do you want from me? Sarah whispered. Simple. You're going to get back in your truck and drive to the real delivery location. The specimens will follow, they've bonded to your scent now. And we're going to follow you, making sure they don't escape again. And if I refuse? The driver gestured toward the darkness beyond the lights. Then you can take your chances with them out there. But I should mention, the last driver who refused to cooperate, we found pieces of him scattered across 3 counties. Sarah looked at her truck, at the eyes still gleaming from beneath the trailer, at the ring of identical vehicles surrounding her. She thought about her mother in the hospital, about the money she desperately needed, about the choice that had led her to this nightmare. Where am I taking them? She asked. North. Into the mountains. There's a facility there that can contain them properly. The driver handed her a new GPS device. Follow this route exactly. Don't deviate, don't stop, don't look back. And Sarah? Yes. Try to stay calm. Fear makes them hungry, and hungry specimens are harder to control. Sarah walked back to her truck on unsteady legs. The things beneath her trailer moved as she approached, rustling and clicking like insects. She climbed into the cab and started the engine, noting that the fuel gauge was somehow full again despite having used half a tank. The GPS showed a route that led deep into mountainous terrain she'd never heard of, to a destination that wasn't marked on any map. As she pulled out of the gas station, the convoy of identical trucks fell into formation around her, ahead, behind, on both sides. In her mirrors, she could see the creatures following, staying just at the edge of her lights. They moved wrong, their shapes shifting and flowing like liquid shadow. Sometimes they looked almost human. Sometimes they looked like nothing that had ever walked the earth. The CB radio filled with voices now, the other drivers coordinating their movements, discussing containment protocols and backup plans. Sarah realized she wasn't just transporting monsters. She was part of some larger operation, some secret organization that dealt with things that weren't supposed to exist. Mile marker 1 appeared in her headlights, marking the beginning of the mountain route. Behind her, something howled, a sound of pure rage and hunger that seemed to shake the very mountains. Sarah gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed on into the darkness, surrounded by trucks full of strangers and followed by nightmares made flesh. Whatever facility waited at the end of this road, she hoped it was strong enough to hold the things she was delivering. Because if it wasn't, she had a feeling that her $20,000 wouldn't matter much when the sun came up. Chat controls Sonnet 4 Smart. Marcus had been dead for 6 hours when he realized he was still driving. The memory came back in fragments, the deer leaping into his headlights, the violent swerve, the guardrail rushing toward his windshield. He remembered the crushing impact, the taste of blood, the world going dark. But somehow, his hands were still on the wheel, his foot still on the accelerator, and his Peterbilt was still rolling down Interstate 84 through the Oregon mountains. The dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m., but the numbers flickered between digital and analog, sometimes showing Roman numerals, sometimes showing symbols he didn't recognize. His CB radio hissed with static that occasionally formed words in languages that had been dead for centuries. Marcus tried to stop the truck, but his foot wouldn't obey. The brake pedal felt solid under his boot, but pressing it did nothing. The steering wheel turned in his hands, following the road's curves without his input. He was a passenger in his own body, watching helplessly as familiar highway markers rolled past his windows. Mile marker 237. He'd passed this same marker 20 minutes ago. The realization hit him like ice water. He was traveling in a loop, the same stretch of highway repeating endlessly. The same billboards, the same exit signs, the same roadkill smeared across the asphalt. Even the potholes were identical, jarring his cab at precisely the same moments. A sign appeared in his headlights: "Welcome to Deadman's Curve, elevation 4,847 feet." Marcus knew this stretch of road. Every trucker on the West Coast knew it. 43 people had died here in the past decade, most of them in truck accidents. The locals called it cursed. Now Marcus understood why. His CB crackled to life. "Evening, driver. Welcome to the night shift." The voice was his own, but older, wearier, carrying the weight of infinite repetition. "Who is this?" Marcus managed to whisper, though he suspected he already knew. "I'm you, about 1,000 loops from now. Maybe 10,000. Hard to keep count when time moves in circles." The voice laughed bitterly. "I'm calling to warn you about what's coming. Not that it matters, we can't change anything. We can only watch." Through his windshield, Marcus saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. A car, moving too fast for the winding mountain road. As it drew closer, he could see it was a sedan with a family inside, parents in front, 2 children in the back. "No," Marcus breathed, understanding flooding through him. Not again. Every loop, his future self confirmed through the radio. Same family, same time, same result. "We're not just dead, Marcus. We're the instrument of their deaths." Over and over and over. The sedan hit the same patch of black ice at the same moment it always did. Marcus watched in horror as the car began to slide toward his truck, the father's face twisted in panic as he fought for control. The children in the back seat were laughing at something, unaware that they had seconds to live. Marcus threw all his strength into turning the wheel, into hitting the brakes, into doing anything to prevent the collision. But his body wouldn't respond. His truck continued its inexorable path as the sedan slid directly into his lane. The impact was tremendous. The car crumpled like paper against his front bumper, disappearing beneath his wheels with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. Marcus felt the familiar bump as his trailer passed over the wreckage, heard the same horrific sounds of destruction. And then, as always, the world reset. Mile marker 237 appeared in his headlights again. The dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m. His CB radio hissed with static. "Loop number 8429, his future self announced wearily. "Give or take a few hundred." After a while, they all blend together. Marcus discovered he could speak more freely now, his vocal cords responding even if the rest of his body remained locked in its predetermined path. "How long have we been doing this? Time doesn't work the same way here. Could be years, could be centuries. I've seen seasons change through the windows, but they always cycle back to this same October night. I've watched technology evolve, saw the first cars turn into muscle cars, turn into hybrids, turn into something I didn't recognize. But here, in this loop, it's always 1987. The year Marcus had died. The year the family in the sedan had died. Why?" Marcus asked. "What did we do to deserve this? Remember what happened before the deer? Right before the accident?" Marcus concentrated, pushing through the fog that seemed to cloud his memories. Slowly, it came back to him. He'd been driving tired, fighting to stay awake after 18 hours on the road. The dispatcher had been pushing him to make an impossible deadline, threatening to fire him if he didn't deliver on time. So he'd kept driving, kept pushing, even when his eyelids grew heavy. He'd been falling asleep at the wheel when the deer appeared. But there had been something else, something in the moments before the deer. A sedan had tried to pass him on a blind curve. A family inside, parents and 2 children. Marcus had been drifting into their lane, too tired to notice, and the father had swerved to avoid him. That swerve had sent the sedan into the path of an oncoming logging truck. Marcus had driven past the wreckage, too cowardly to stop, too afraid of the questions that would come. He'd convinced himself it wasn't his fault, that the other driver had been reckless, that these things just happened. 20 miles down the road, karma had found him in the form of a startled deer. "We killed them," Marcus whispered. "And then we ran," his future self confirmed. "So now we get to watch them die forever. And every loop, they trust us a little bit more. They wave at us as they pass." The kids press their faces against the back window and smile. As if summoned by his words, headlights appeared in the distance. The same sedan, the same family, approaching their doom with innocent confidence. Marcus could see the father's hand on the steering wheel, relaxed and sure. The mother was turned around, talking to the children in the back seat. "I've tried everything," his future self continued. "Screaming warnings through the CB radio, they can't hear us. Trying to communicate through the horn, the lights, anything. We're ghosts to them. They see the truck, but they can't see the driver." The sedan was getting closer. Marcus could see the children more clearly now, a boy about 8, a girl maybe 6. They were playing some kind of game, their faces bright with laughter. The mother was smiling, the father was humming along to the radio. They had no idea they were about to die. "What happens to them?" Marcus asked. After the crash. "I don't know. I hope they move on. I hope they find peace. But we're stuck here. Reliving our crime forever." The sedan reached the patch of black ice. The father's expression changed as he felt the car begin to slide. The laughter in the back seat turned to confusion, then fear. The mother reached for the dashboard as she realized they were sliding toward the oncoming truck. Marcus closed his eyes, but he could still see everything through his eyelids. Could still hear the screaming, the impact, the terrible silence that followed. When he opened his eyes, mile marker 237 was there again. "Loop 8430, his future self announced. But something was different this time. Marcus could feel it, a subtle shift in the repetition, like a record player with a worn needle finally jumping to a new groove. The dashboard clock still read 3:17 a.m., but now it was counting seconds, the digital display advancing with each heartbeat. "Did you feel that?" Marcus asked. The CB was silent for a long moment. "Then, the loop is changing. After all this time, something's different." Through his windshield, Marcus saw new headlights approaching. But these weren't the familiar sedan. This was another 18-wheeler, identical to his own, approaching from the opposite direction. As it drew closer, Marcus could see the driver clearly. It was himself. An older version, weathered by endless repetition, eyes hollow with the weight of infinite guilt. The two trucks passed each other at the exact moment they always hit the family's sedan. But instead of an impact, there was only a strange shifting sensation, like stepping through a doorway made of smoke. Suddenly, Marcus was in the other truck, looking back at his younger self. And his younger self was in the original truck, just beginning the loop for the first time. "The circle is expanding," the voice on the CB said, but now it was coming from behind him. "Every time we relive it, we split. Another version of ourselves, another driver trapped in the same nightmare." Marcus looked in his mirrors and saw a convoy stretching back into the darkness, dozens of identical trucks, each one carrying a different version of himself, all locked in the same eternal loop. Some of the drivers looked like him as he was now. Others were older, more worn, their faces marked by the passage of impossible years. "How many of us are there?" Marcus whispered. "One for every loop. One for every time we've killed that family. And now you're part of the convoy, brother. Welcome to the night shift that never ends." The CB filled with voices then, all variations of his own voice, some bitter, some broken, some driven mad by endless repetition. They spoke over each other, sharing observations about the loop, debating theories about their punishment, comparing notes on failed escape attempts. But underneath all the voices, Marcus could hear something else. Laughter. Children's laughter, bright and innocent and eternal. The sound of two kids playing a game in the back seat of a car, unaware that their joy had become the soundtrack to hell. Mile marker 237 appeared in his headlights yet again. The dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m. And in the distance, headlights approached, a sedan with a family inside, driving toward their appointment with death and the ever-growing convoy of guilty souls who would deliver it to them. Marcus gripped his steering wheel and began the loop again, knowing that somewhere behind him, another version of himself was just realizing he'd been dead for 6 hours and was still driving. The last mile stretched ahead, endless and unchanging, populated by the innocent dead and the guilty who could never die enough to pay for what they'd done. Loop 8431 began with the familiar hiss of the CB radio and the sound of children laughing in a car that existed only in the space between guilt and punishment, between justice and mercy, between the last mile and the first mile of a road that had no beginning and would never have an end. Chat controls Sonnet 4. Eddie first noticed the road was breathing around 2 a.m. on Interstate 19, somewhere between Tucson and the Mexican border. The asphalt beneath his wheels pulsed rhythmically, like a massive chest rising and falling in sleep. At first, he blamed exhaustion. He'd been driving for 14 straight hours, pushing his rig through the Arizona desert on nothing but truck stop coffee and amphetamines. But when he pulled over at the next rest stop and walked around his trailer, the truth became undeniable. The road wasn't made of asphalt anymore. It was skin. Pale, mottled flesh stretched across the desert floor, marked with what looked like surgical scars and strange tattoos that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. Eddie's CB radio crackled with interference that sounded almost like whispers. He tried calling for help, scanning through channels, but found only static punctuated by what might have been breathing, slow, labored inhalations followed by wet exhalations. Breaker 19, this is Desert Fox, he called into the microphone, his voice shaking. Can anyone copy? Something's wrong with the road out here. The static cleared, and a voice responded, calm, professional, completely at odds with the nightmare around him. Evening, Desert Fox. This is Highway Patrol. We've been expecting your call. Expecting my call? Look, I need to report some kind of. I don't know what to call it. The road's gone wrong. It's not road anymore. Oh, we know exactly what you're seeing, Mr. Kowalski. Edward James Kowalski, DOT medical certification expired 6 months ago, driving with a suspended CDL after your third DUI conviction. Eddie's blood froze. They knew his name, knew his violations. But more importantly, they knew what he was seeing, which meant. The road chooses its own, the voice continued. And it's chosen you, Eddie. You've been driving on borrowed time, hauling loads you shouldn't be hauling, falsifying logbooks, operating under the influence. The highway has been watching. Eddie looked down at the flesh beneath his feet. The skin was warm, and he could feel blood vessels pulsing underneath. Somewhere in the distance, he heard what sounded like a heartbeat, massive, slow, echoing across the desert. What is this place? He whispered. This is where the road goes when it gets tired of being walked on, driven on, abused by people who don't respect it. Every mile of highway that's been stained with blood, every stretch of asphalt that's absorbed the screams of accident victims, it all ends up here eventually. Eddie ran back to his truck, but the door handle was wrong. Instead of metal, his fingers closed around something soft and yielding. The handle was made of cartilage, warm and slightly damp. He jerked his hand away and saw that his palm was stained with a clear, sticky fluid. The truck itself was changing. The red paint job was fading into pink, then deepening to the color of raw meat. Chrome bumpers had become white bone, polished and gleaming. His trailer was transforming into a massive ribcage, the cargo doors now resembling a chest cavity sealed with membrane instead of metal. "Get back in, Eddie," the radio voice commanded. "You have a delivery to make." "I'm not getting in that thing." "You don't have a choice. You signed the contract when you first got behind the wheel with alcohol in your system. When you first falsified a medical certificate. When you first decided that rules were for other people. The highway owns you now." Eddie looked around desperately for another way out. The rest stop was gone, replaced by a grove of trees that weren't quite trees. They were tall, pale structures that looked like oversized nerve endings, their branches twitching with electrical impulses. Between them, Eddie could see other vehicles, trucks, cars, motorcycles, all in various stages of biological transformation. A school bus had become a yellow caterpillar-like creature, its windows now compound eyes that tracked Eddie's movement. A sports car had sprouted what looked like gills along its sides, opening and closing rhythmically. And there, parked between two semi-trailers that had grown together like conjoined twins, was a highway patrol car that pulsed with veins visible beneath its black and white skin. The officer who stepped out was mostly human, but his uniform had fused with his flesh, and his badge was a scab-covered growth on his chest. His face was recognizable as human, but wrong, too many teeth, eyes that reflected light like an animal's. "Mr. Kowalski, you need to complete your route. Your cargo is waiting." Eddie hadn't loaded any cargo. His trailer had been empty when he'd started this run. But when he looked back at his truck, he could see it was full now. Through the translucent membrane that had replaced his trailer doors, shapes were moving. Large shapes, writhing and pressing against the walls. "What's in there?" he asked. "The other drivers," the officer replied. "The ones who came before you. They're being processed, digested by the highway. Soon they'll become part of the road itself, feeling every tire that passes over them, every footstep, every drop of blood that spills on the asphalt." Eddie could hear them now, muffled voices from inside his trailer, calling for help, screaming in languages he didn't recognize. Some sounded recent, desperate and afraid. Others were older, worn down by time and repetition, reduced to wordless moaning. "I won't do it," Eddie said. "I won't be part of this." "You already are." The officer gestured toward Eddie's feet. Looking down, Eddie saw that his boots had merged with the flesh road. Tendrils of skin had grown up around his ankles, holding him in place. He could feel the highway's pulse through the soles of his feet, could sense the vast network of blood vessels and nerves that stretched across the continent like a second circulatory system. "Every mile of highway in America is connected," the officer explained. "Every rest stop, every truck stop, every mile marker. They're all organs in the same massive body. And that body is hungry. It feeds on the guilt of drivers like you, on the blood of accidents, on the fear of people who realize they're lost and can't find their way back to the real roads." Eddie felt something moving up his legs. Looking down, he saw that the flesh road was growing into him, merging with his skin, making him part of the living highway. He could feel his consciousness expanding, becoming aware of drivers hundreds of miles away, feeling their weight on his body, their exhaust burning his lungs. "The highway has been patient with you, Eddie," the officer continued. 3 DUIs, dozens of violations, that family you almost hit outside Phoenix last month when you fell asleep at the wheel. It's been collecting evidence, building a case. Now it's time for sentencing." Eddie's truck had completed its transformation. The cab was now a skull-like structure with headlights that looked like empty eye sockets. The steering wheel had become a spine, the dashboard a collection of organs visible through translucent skin. The CB radio was still functional, but instead of static, it now transmitted the sounds of digestion, wet, organic noises punctuated by the occasional scream. "Get in," the officer commanded. "You have deliveries to make." Eddie found his legs moving against his will, carrying him toward the biological nightmare that had once been his truck. The door opened with a sound like tearing flesh, revealing an interior that was all red muscle and yellow fat, arteries and nerves running along the walls like wiring. The seat embraced him like a living thing, tendrils wrapping around his arms and torso. He could feel needles sliding into his skin, not painful, but invasive, connecting him to the truck's nervous system. His hands found the spine steering wheel, and immediately he could feel the highway stretching ahead of him, thousands of miles of living tissue masquerading as roads. "Your first delivery is in El Paso," the officer said, his voice now coming from inside Eddie's head. "Pick up 3 more drivers from the processing station. They've been marinating nicely for the past week." The truck started itself, the engine now a beating heart somewhere beneath Eddie's feet. Through the windshield, which had become a transparent membrane, Eddie could see the flesh highway stretching ahead, marked with glowing veins instead of lane dividers. Other vehicles were traveling the highway, all of them transformed, all of them carrying cargo that screamed and pleaded and eventually fell silent. Eddie recognized some of the drivers. He'd met them at truck stops over the years, shared coffee and stories and complaints about DOT regulations. Now they were part of the highway's digestive system, their bodies fused with their vehicles, their consciousness expanded to feel every mile they traveled. "Why are you doing this to us?" Eddie asked through the truck's nervous system. "Because you never learned to respect the road," came the reply, spoken by 1,000 voices in unison, all the drivers who had come before him, all the ones who were being slowly dissolved in trailers like his, all the ones who had become part of the highway's flesh. "You treated it like it was there for your convenience. You never thought about what it might want." Eddie's CB radio crackled with new voices, dispatchers who weren't quite human anymore, giving directions to roads that didn't appear on any map. Coordinates to processing stations hidden in plain sight across the country, disguised as truck stops and rest areas and way stations. 10 to 4, meet wagon 7, came a voice dripping with organic wetness. "You're cleared for pickup at mile marker 847. 3 fresh ones, 1 still fighting. Handle with care, we don't want them to spoil before delivery." Eddie tried to respond, tried to refuse, but the words that came out of his mouth weren't his own. "Copy that, dispatch. ETA 15 minutes. Any special instructions for this batch?" "Negative, meet wagon 7. Standard processing. The highway is particularly hungry tonight." Through his transformed windshield, Eddie could see his destination ahead, a truck stop that looked normal from the outside but pulsed with veins just beneath the surface. 3 drivers were refueling their rigs, unaware that their trucks were slowly changing, that the diesel pumps were injecting something else along with the fuel. Eddie watched helplessly as his trailer doors opened like a mouth, revealing the writhing mass of partially digested drivers inside. The new victims would join them soon, would become part of the highway's endless appetite for guilt and flesh and the screams of people who realized too late that some roads lead nowhere good. The flesh highway stretched ahead into the darkness, connecting every mile of America's roads in a vast circulatory system of blood and bone and guilt. And Eddie was part of it now, forever driving the night shift on the highway that fed on drivers who had forgotten that every road demands respect, every mile exacts a price, and some destinations are not meant to be reached by the living. His CB radio crackled with the sounds of feeding, and in the distance, another truck approached, its driver unaware that he was about to learn what happens when the road decides it's tired of being driven on. The highway was always hungry, always growing, always ready to welcome new drivers to the night shift that never ended. Chat controls Sonnet 4.